All right, it is, if I have this correct, it's probably the first week in September. Today is, I'm recording this on the 22nd, so 29th. I guess it's like the September 3rd or 4th, Wednesday is what I'm guessing. So I'm continuing on from the video that we watched last Friday or Thursday, last week, and going from quality control to inventory control. So that's the topic, and that is in the same chapter of the book that we were in, which would be chapter 23. Chapter 23. Inventory control, page 158. So the bridge from that to inventory control is lean production. So this lean production idea, Kaizen, lean production, is how to do different parts of the production process in a more efficient way, but it's also about the efficiency of the entire process and managing the flow of supplies and finished product through the chain of production. So supply chain and distribution chain. The main considerations again are how you manage the cost. So the cost of storage, the cost of delivery, the cost of different levels of quality, how much you should keep at any one time. So there's all of those considerations, and that depends on your demand, right? If you have a demand that's very steady, and sometimes I think that I think Vina Milk is really good at this, for example. They just make as many of something as they can make until they run out. Then they ship them. If they don't have them, the supermarket relationship with it's like, oh, do you have strawberry yogurt? No, we're out. Okay, well, what do you got? We got plain and pineapple or whatever we have. Okay, well, send us, 100, cases of that. They just do it like whatever they have. It really feels like that's how they manage their supplies. So that way they don't have any waste, right? They just produce. Well, we've only got this much milk for this many yogurts. Produce them, send them out, and that's it. I love the strawberry yogurt, but they don't make it anymore. I have to hunt to like 7 or 8 stores. So as a consumer, it's very frustrating to me that I cannot find the product that I want. Not that it's really that frustrating that I can't find yogurt, but you know what I mean. But it is annoying a little bit. You're kind of like, okay, well, if I want to have yogurt, I don't want to have this kind. The one I like is not available anymore. What's the other one? Upjaw. I cannot find that one anymore. That one they stopped. I don't know why. They ran out of walnuts. So, okay, stop walnuts and then go back to the other one again. So some supply chains, I guess you could call that efficient. If your suppliers don't really care what you're delivering, then your inventory control can be pretty much open to whatever you can get at the best price at the best time. However, if you have a demand, a seasonal demand, for example, like Tet Holiday, and you really need to have a high inventory to get ready for Tet Holiday, then you have to do a lot of planning, and then you get into inventory control problems again. So that's just the beginning. We're going to finish this video first.
Of storing and handling that stock, all as a result of overproduction, wasteful production. Waste, or it's the most important and potentially significant example up to the required standard of quality. And this is often the case. You find this a lot in businesses that are uncompetitive, a high level of substandard or defective output. We're going to take a look briefly for the rest of this video at some of the main methods of lean production. There are a whole variety of them, and it's important for you to have an awareness of them rather than necessarily detailed knowledge. Of course, with all lean production methods, the key thing to remember, this is not a short-term fix. Lean production is more of a long-term philosophy. A lot of these techniques are difficult to implement and difficult to sustain, and they do require, for example, in relation to just-in-time, good and sustained relationships with key suppliers. It involves a sustained investment in training of staff, and it's largely around culture, a culture of quality assurance, a willingness to always look at searching out, finding and solving issues of waste in the business. Therefore, to a large extent, successful lean production requires that trust between management and employees that's built on a sustainable relationship. Let's just briefly and quickly look at some of the main methods of lean production. As I say, you don't need to know all the detail, but you do need to have an awareness of the different approaches. Time-based management, for example, is an approach to lean production that seeks to look at all the different elements of time used in the operational processes and try to reduce idle or wasted time. And a key aspect of time-based management is to organise production flexibly. Try to find ways of organising production capacity so that products can be changed around quickly, so that there is some flexibility about the capacity of the production lines. And another key requirement of time-based management is to ensure that employees are appropriately trained, and in particular, that they are multi-skilled, they're able to move from one task or different part of a process to another, that they're not simply waiting around idly waiting for their particular job or their particular role to be completed.
And that also has to do with inventory too, right? Because you have to know a very important concept, turnaround time. If you're a logistics manager, you have to know how long it is between the time that you place an order and you can receive it. Now, if there's a farm outside of Ho Chi Minh City, great, that's probably not going to be a huge turnaround time. But if you need a specialized kind of metal that's used for the use of the Wi-Fi on your phone, and it only comes from 2 or 3 different countries, and there's a lot of competition to get those supplies, you could be dead if you really need it. So you have to work out those timelines and turnarounds. And this kind of production, so on the one hand, you have to understand that all those turnaround times and logistics, but also the idea here is that you're a bakery. How long does it take you to shift the oven from ready to produce cakes to donuts or bread or whatever? There's different settings, different sizes, different ways to use the oven. There's different pans, there's different preparation, there's different storage. So how can you get a system so you ship things really quick and save time and keep moving? Or is it a big deal to make a change every time you shift a batch production from one good to another? Printing, like in a print house, that would be really important. So the staff has to be really good at moving from task to task.
Simultaneous engineering is another example of lean production, which we won't spend a lot of time on, but essentially this is about trying to fast track the planning of complex projects, and in particular new product development. And the key here is to try to find ways of doing everything at the same time by bringing together teams rather than as a series of activities. Cell production involves teams, teamwork of employees working together in a cell where each cell is responsible for a complete unit of work. And it's found that cell production can lead to a significant reduction in waste because the cell takes ownership and takes responsibility for the satisfactory completion of the work.
So cell production would be what happens in a lot of laptop computers, because computers have a lot of components. So they're going to take the hard drive from company X, they're going to take the sound card from another company, my vocabulary is so gone. Monitor! They need a monitor from another company. And so all these things are assembled separately in different cells. So the quality control checks are done within those cells to begin with. So hopefully that leads to quality being built into the entire machine once it's completed.
A key benefit of cell production, of course, is that the cell members are working as a team, and therefore their communication should be better. Cell production is also a way of facilitating this concept of multi-skilling, which is we've seen is a key way of reducing the time required by each production process. Just in time, I'm sure you've heard of, often shortened to JIT or JIT. Just in time is all about organising the production or operations process so that the inputs only arrive as they are needed. The inputs could be raw materials, but of course it could also be services, it could be time, it could be other components.
We'll go into detail on this more. So this is just like kind of the introduction of JIT, just in time. Now, this is the mess, a little bit of the mess that we're in terms of the world we're in now. So in terms of efficiency and cost for a company, it's much cheaper if they just let their suppliers deal with all the rushing and deliveries and have to worry about logistics and rely upon them to be able to deliver right when it's necessary for the production process. No warehousing, no extra inventory, no cash flow problems because they're not holding a lot of inventory. Don't forget cash flow. So what happens in a just-in-time system, which is what much of the world is running on now, is that everything is set up to be able to make a phone call, you get a production order, and then the whole supply chain to the factory, from the factory, produce, distribute, send to the distributors, really quick. But when supply chains get broken, like COVID is creating a lot of broken supply chains, then all of a sudden it's a mad scramble and it's a fight for resources, and costs and prices go up as companies are more desperate to get their supply chain running again. So just in time is fragile. There's a fragility in it that if the world is not running well, if there's some political or economic or social or epidemic type of disruptions externally, the whole thing can unravel pretty quickly, unfortunately, which is dangerous for food.
Just in time is essentially around the complex scheduling of operations so that the resources or the inputs into the operational process only arrive precisely when they're needed. So for example, a factory operating just in time would receive the inputs, the raw materials, the components for maybe that evening's or next day's production a few hours before they hit the assembly lines or the production line. Now, of course, that's a very good way of minimizing stocks and inventories, but you can imagine that it also requires a great deal of trust between the business and the suppliers of those inputs, making sure they genuinely arrive at the right time. A key benefit of just-in-time is that it reduces stocks, it reduces the level of inventories. And stock is only received when it's needed. It also means that less working capital is invested in inventories. Potential drawback of just-in-time is that it leaves very little room for mistakes.
I want to come back to this.
Lean management, sometimes otherwise known as continuous improvement. And this is more of a cultural approach within an organisation, because it's all about identifying those small incremental changes in the way things are done that can lead to small improvements in efficiency and or quality, but taken together and over a longer period of time, the effect on the business's productivity, efficiency and waste can be very significant. The key point about Kaizen is that the ideas of continuous improvement come from those involved in the operational processes, from the employees. And what they're looking for are the small improvements that don't necessarily need large investments, but can lead to significant benefits. All employees are looking for small ways to improve their own performance, or perhaps that of their team. And a great benefit of Kaizen, if it's implemented successfully and the rewards are shared, is that employees really do take ownership of their work, very much reinforcing the concepts and the benefits of team working and the consequent effects on motivation. There we go, give you a proof of just in time.
We'll come back to this just in time. So, Kaizen, I think you're a little bit familiar with. This is just a little PowerPoint, and it just tries to kind of give you an idea of how connected certain elements of the supply chain are for Apple company. Their supply chain is worldwide for all these products that they need and inputs that they need. So, history, no. Okay, so Apple suppliers. Most of Apple's suppliers are from the Far East. Here's a Google map of where they get their pieces from. So if you can't really see it, it's okay. But for example, the green ones, that means they get like 20 different elements or parts or IP pieces from those places. And then the red ones, they have hundreds of different suppliers. I mean, there's literally hundreds. They get 109 different pieces from Japan, and the facilities that are located to make the production. So it's just, it's incredible, right? How much logistics they need to put this whole thing together. They have over 1 million workers in their supply chain. So this is running from, all the problems you can imagine that come from that. They have their top 200 manufacturers listed, but they must have 1,000. Their supply chain, because of all the shifting around, and there's an ethical element here because of all the shifting around of, because everything is so spread out. Of course, there's tons of shipping. Shipping creates pollution, and they're not really eco-friendly. A lot of the metals they use are toxic. A lot of their phones are not actually, most of it I think is recyclable, but some of it isn't. They use a ton of water, just a ton of water to produce. They have circuit boards. That's like the main internal point. But you can imagine that, they have a Wuhan-based supplier of circuit boards who polluted the water. So poor Wuhan, everything crazy and weird happens in Wuhan. I never even heard of Wuhan until the last 3 years. And now Wuhan, it turns out, is basic for all kinds of weird things happening. So Apple tries to manage their supply chain and audit and look for ethical issues, but it is pretty hard for them to manage the whole ecological footprint. A lot of this is about ecology. Well, I don't want to talk about that right now because we just talked about ethics before, but it started off what I wanted it to be, but then it didn't finish. Again, we're dealing with logistics and how much we need to hold on to goods as they ship. ship them around. So that's just the inputs. That's just the inputs to the supply chain. And then once you get in the factory, so if you're looking at page 158, if you look at 158 in our book, it discusses inventory management in terms of stages, again, just like before, materials, inputs, works in process. So what do you do with the half-finished goods in the factory? How does that flow? Do they need to sit around, or can they continue? In a flow production or a mass production, you just go from the beginning until the end in the finished product. There's not a lot of goods sitting around. But if you're in a job or batch production, there may be quite a bit of inventory that's waiting to be completed, sitting in the factory. Let's look at Apple. I think Apple is mass.
Any supply chain. The suggestion is that a big Apple supplier named Suyin Electronics employed workers as young as 14 in the interest of keeping up with the ferocious appetite for Apple goods in the West. Apple chided Suyin, but maintained ties for months and even years afterwards. With new allegations like this and a spate of suicides associated with the brand's manufacturing base over the years, we thought it was time we put on our lanyards and take a peek inside an iPhone factory in China. The first and most important thing to understand is that Apple factories in China aren't technically Apple factories at all. Instead, the California tech giant subcontracts its manufacturing out to a firm called Han High Precision Industry Co. Limited, which is...
That's outsourcing.
It manufactures consumer electronics for a variety of companies, from Samsung to Dell to HP, but is most famous for manufacturing Apple products, and most notably the iPhone. Fully half of all the world's iPhones, many hundreds of millions, are manufactured at a sprawling Foxconn facility on the outskirts of Zhengzhou. Zhengzhou is a city of around 9.5 million people in Hunan province, historically a poverty-stricken province of the People's Republic. Locals often refer to the Zhengzhou Foxconn plant as iPhone City, and that's a pretty fair description. At peak time, some 350,000 staff work there, most living in dormitories on site. During the build-up to a big new iPhone release, the plant can produce as many as 500,000 units a day. That's nearly 350 every minute. Around the factory, supporting businesses such as restaurants, massage parlors and shoe shops have sprung up to support the mammoth workforce. Inside the Zhengzhou factory, which is dedicated to the final stage of iPhone assembly, some 400 discrete tasks are broken down and carried out by its army of workers. Most employees will perform one task repeatedly over and over again, day after day. This could be as interesting as soldering or as dull as fitting a single screw into the back of the devices, again and again and again. So how do they recruit? Back in 2017, a student at NYU called Daijian Zheng went undercover for 6 months at the Zhengzhou plant to investigate the labor situation. According to Zheng's report, all he had to do to get hired was join a queue of eager applicants outside the factory. Zheng was asked for his identification and retired to recite the English alphabet as it was in common use in the factory. Then he was in. Zheng worked on an assembly line with around 200 other recruits, monotonously assembling many hundreds of devices per shift. He said the work was boring and tiring, but didn't report any specific abuses across the grueling 6-day week, aside from a supervisor yelling every now and then. His main complaint was that the overtime was presented as voluntary, but was very clearly mandatory on pain of being fired. It's been reported elsewhere that the Chinese government itself, keen to keep this lucrative business running smoothly, steps in to help with a never-ending recruitment drive. During peak summer months, in the build-up to the traditional autumn iPhone release date, the speaker is said to stand at the Zhengzhou factory gates, yelling out for workers who are optimistic and diligent. Hunan province...
This is not exactly what I wanted to hear about. I thought it was going to be better again, but I will note that this does highlight that not only does a factory need to worry about the suppliers, it has to have a consistent supply of staff and employees as well, and that can be a bit of a challenge. You know, your HR department is also involved in this whole process. So if you don't have enough staff to run what you're trying to run, which is what's happening in the US now, a lot of workers are not going back to the jobs after the pandemic. They don't believe they get enough money for the jobs and the risk that they do. And the companies are, trying to keep the keep their salaries low, so it's a bit of a battle. Alright, so there's a pretty good chapter here in this website that I found. It's called Business Management IB. Now, normally in this website, it's a paid-for website, but it's kind of cool that this one chapter is available to us for free because it's a sample chapter and it's what we're studying right now. So it's called Business Management IB, and I guess for students they have some kind of sales thing that they try to sell to you. And $50, $100 for a teacher. They should support me, but I'm not sure. It's okay. I'm still not sure it's worth $200. Requires a teacher's membership, and then the students can get some of it. In any event, we can look at the samples here. There's some review samples that you could use for like cash flow analysis, for example, and organizational culture, but they do have one in production planning, which is what we're doing right now. And this one is got some good, not only does it have good definitions, it has some interesting quizzes at the end to support us. So supply chain processes. So we have this idea here, which goes from subcomponent, which is parts and parts, to component manufacturers, to they're saying they're making TVs. Hundreds of logistics service providers for high definition television assembly. That would be like the Wuhan Foxconn plant. And then you have wholesalers shifting to retailers from consumers. So you have 1,000 subcontractors ending up with millions of consumers. You have to buy the supplies. You have to produce, make it, you have to ship it, move it, and then you have sales. So you have all these different elements that are connected in the process. So many videos.
As consumers, when we get to the store, we tend to be focused on products and their price. Rarely do consumers think about where the item came from. And even if they do, they tend to think simply about the point of origin and the final destination. Perhaps a more perceptive person might even think about the primary mode of transport used to deliver the product. Even that level of thought is very limited though. It would be like saying a person from New York got to Tempe, Arizona by airplane. Technically, the airplane was the primary mode of transportation, but did that person walk out their front door and jump into an airplane that then arrived outside this building? Many of you who have traveled by airplane know that the process is much more complicated. Think about everything required for you to travel by airplane. You'll buy a ticket, pack your bags, get a ride to the airport, check your bags, get through airport security, board the plane using that particular airline's boarding process, and finally, you're ready to fly. But if you're scheduled for a layover, you'll have to sit in people warehousing. Then you'll be ready to board another airplane, which will hopefully get you to your final destination. And even then, you'll need to shuffle off the airplane, get your luggage, and find a ride to get you to your absolute final destination. And that's only what you experience. Think of all the work done by airport and airline staff at every level. This allows us to understand why this militaristic term logistics is about so much more than transportation. Moving yourself from one city to another is difficult enough, but at least you're there to make decisions, ask questions, and know the full details of the trip as they happen. Products traveling the world don't have the ability to make changes or ask questions, which means that the planning and preparation aspects of logistics are even more crucial to consider for supply chain managers. Logistics executives must make decisions related to packaging, containerization, documentation, insurance, storage, and importing and exporting regulations.
Wow, see what happens?
Storage,
you're talking not only about those things, you have import-export rules, you have all kinds of other customs to deal with. So there's a lot of even other stuff that you have to figure out that could get in the way of your process, right? You could have issues with, the shipping company has nothing to do with the supplier at all.
And importing and exporting regulations. Ultimately, though, transportation is very important because the transportation mode of choice will likely dictate how a supply chain manager will draw up a complete logistical plan. Still, the world is so big and each item is so different that even for experienced executives, logistics can be intimidating. So daunting is logistics that an industry of cargo travel agents called freight forwarders are available to guide you through all the complex details. No matter what the industry or destination, it's likely you can find a specialist that will carefully plan the delivery of your cargo. Through supply...
All right, dude, now you're selling me something. Anyway, the point is, yeah, even if you just want to take a flight and go somewhere, there's about 20 things you have to plan for before you can even decide to make your trip. And so yeah, it's a pretty good video. Stock has 3 forms. We already know this. This is in our book. Also, work in progress, finished goods. There's a section here on costs of holding too much stock, which is good for our notes. First cost is storage. Storage is the most basic cost that you have if you have too much. Second, wastage, or maybe it's out of date. So let's say you thought that MP3 players were going to be the future, and you got a good price, and so you bought 20,000 MP3 players with a memory of 128 megabytes. Sounds great, right? But if you don't sell them quickly, then the next MP3 player has a memory of 1 gigabyte. Nobody wants your small memory MP3 players anymore. They're waste. They're obsolete. They're out of date. So maybe that's harder to see with electronics, but electronics are really getting out of date quickly. Really quickly. Anything that's not sold within a year in electronics is really out of date. And then obviously you have all the products that are fruit, vegetables, food, things that can die. Even medicine. The last one is the thing that people don't really think about. So you have storage cost, wastage, and then opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is the money that you're spending on extra inventory that could be used for other purposes. So pay off loans, buy new equipment, you could be earning interest in other investments. So opportunity cost is the cost of having too much inventory. The problem of not having enough stock at one time. Of course, you cannot fulfill the order. So if someone's ordering stocks and you haven't organized for enough to be able to produce more, then you'll have to have a sad story, conversation with your customer. Your customer says, I really need a tet's coming. Can you make a lot of mooncakes for me? And I say, no, I'm sorry. We really want to have your business, but I can't produce as many as you need right now. And you lose sales. So that's bad. Lost sales. In purchasing contracts between businesses, it's common for there to be a penalty payment if the supplier cannot meet the time delay. So I guess that's the other option. You could be honest and say, I can't meet that demand. Or you could be dishonest and try to think that you can still find a way to supply that demand, even though you don't know how you're going to do it, and then you end up delaying your customer. I think that's going to create a problem where your customer is really going to be upset with you and maybe even be able to create a lawsuit. Right? If you lie about your production time, I mean, that's your business's reputation also. So, number two, idle production resources. So the capacity is not being used in the factory. So that is idle resources, which is waste of time, labor, money, fixed cost. Not holding enough stock. And what that means is that you don't have the inventory that you need to start your production. So everybody's just waiting around. If you have any special orders, then that's unpredictable, which is similar to lost sales. So you have two inventories to check here. You have the first inventory, which is the finished product, right? We did talk about that. The finished product, is it ready to be shipped? So you can get an order that can be fulfilled immediately. How much should you keep? That's the question. Then you have your supply inputs. How much should you have to get ready for special orders or different kinds of production? Now, if you're batch production and you're a bakery, it gets really complicated because some of the things that you need as supplies, maybe they don't last forever, but you don't want to hold them forever if no one orders that particular product. So you have to be careful how much you're going to keep and how quick. So maybe some things you want to keep around a lot, and some other things you want to have a reliable supplier that's ready for a special order. So, and that gets into the just-in-time system again. Small order quantities. Keeping low stock levels may mean only ordering goods and supplies in small quantities. The larger the size of each delivery, the higher will be the average stock held. By ordering in small quantities, of course, you will leave. It's like the negative economies of scale. You're paying the highest price for each time you buy the supplies. Some key terms. I do like this little section. Some key terms. Economic order quantity. It's a relatively new term, but this would be like the perfect amount that you can manage of inventory. Enough to fulfill orders, but not too much to waste money. A buffer stock. Just like buffering on a video, there's a little line that goes a little bit forward to make sure that even if the internet stops, your video can continue until you can restart your internet and you have no interruptions. Same principle, same idea for inventory control. You have a little bit of extra inventory so you can maintain shipping to your customers until you can catch up with your, get your production going again. It's a buffer stock. It's the minimum stock can be held to ensure that we can avoid delays. Lead time, you know, that's my favorite, the time between an order and delivery. Simple concept, right? From how long does it take for me to order, to get a delivery when I order right now? If you have a system that looks at, that knows what its buffer stocks should be, how much they need to have just in case, then you have a reorder stock level. So whenever the stock level gets low enough, it automatically reorders so you can get back to your basic buffer stock level. I hope that makes sense. And then you have the two main kinds of stock management systems that are called just in case and just in time. That's in our book, but I think this is actually done somewhat better. Just in time means that you do not keep a strong inventory and that there are very little buffer stocks. And that you have good communication with suppliers and you can order. It can be, you can have a mix too. But in the extreme form, you don't really have any inventory and your suppliers are going to you're going to deal with your suppliers immediately after you get your order and then start your supply chain into your production as fast as possible with the goal of having very little extra, very little waste, very little warehouses to use, very little extra costs. So companies like Extra Time, just in time for that. We try to deliver it through the entire process in a very quick way. To be successful, just in time needs to have good relationships with suppliers, and most of this is also on page 159. You have to have good relationships with suppliers who can be reacting immediately to your requests. Your staff, you need to have a good idea that they're able to switch into a new order or a new product or whatever they have to work on right away. And that their machinery and equipment must be flexible to be able to react immediately. And depending on the accuracy of your sales forecast, it's easier. It's easier if you know your demand. So it's very difficult for a firm to predict likely future sales levels. If it is very difficult, then keeping zero stocks can be risky. Demand forecasts can be converted into production schedules that allow calculation. So you have to, but you have to put that together with lead time. You have to, if you know your lead time for some things is longer than others, so you have to compare all the lead times, which is, for Apple, very complicated. So you have all these different lead times that you need to consider and which ones you have to order first. So if you have long lead times and very strange demand requests from customers, then probably you need to have a little bit more extra stock and inventory just in case. Yeah, I think I like the other one a little bit better from our book for that part. Advantages and disadvantages of just in time. First of all, let's look at who it may not be suitable for. It may not be suitable if the costs from production are very, if you're really worried about stopping production, you better have enough of everything. Inflation and changes in currency could create hedging problems if you need to order internationally. And also oil prices could be affecting that too. So if you're, all the costs of transportation and distribution are going to be higher in just in time. Just in case you don't have any, it's sitting in the warehouse. You have more costs about warehouse and opportunity costs, but with just in time you have more delivery costs. So you have to compare those two. See if there's anything I want to look at here real quick. just comparisons, and you can say a lot of these are the opposite for just in case. Advantage of just in time: less capital used for inventory, better cash flow. Disadvantage: if you don't receive the supplies, it will lead to production delays. Advantage: cost of storage, cheap. Just in case, cost of storage is high. Just in case, less production delays. Disadvantage: delivery costs increase. Just in case, delivery costs decrease. Advantage of just in time: the factory space can be used for more production-oriented purposes. Just in case, you have to use your factory and your buildings for warehouse space. Disadvantage of just in time: you need to have your logistics team ready to call suppliers everywhere very quickly. Just in case, your supply team can be relaxed. They have already ready for the original orders to come in. They can chill out and take their time. It's not a stressful situation. Just in time benefit: less waste because of products getting old. Just in case, more waste because of products getting old. Just in time: less discounts from suppliers because you order small amounts. Just in case, bigger discounts because you order more at the same time. Advantage: quicker response times to consumer demands because of the relationships with the suppliers. Just in case, might be a little bit slower when there's some big special order that you're really not ready for. So, because you don't have the same relationship with the suppliers. So I think those are really good comparisons there. I will post this into the classroom because I think it's pretty good. Here is how stock inventory, classic inventory works. So what happens is that you can see there's a lead time expectation for how long it takes. So we have time and stock level on the X and Y axes. The company will try to keep a maximum stock level, which is like the perfect buffer level again. So at that point, you feel that you're able to meet most of the demand that your customers have. So you'll set a point where when the inventory goes to the reorder level, the reorder level will set off an order to, maybe it's electronic, or maybe there's somebody who notices it, or I don't know, somebody's got to record it, right? Like every supermarket and every convenience store has this system where they go to a certain level and then they reorder. Now they know, right now, nobody knows, but in general, they should know the lead time. So they know that their inventory will continue to fall. So what they do is they order enough quantity to get back to the maximum level. So they can predict. This is about the predictable nature of your sales. So they can predict the reorder level. It will continue to fall. And then there's still a little bit of buffer stock, just in case, here at the bottom, just below the star here.